Hello, everyone. We are going to continue our discussion on the iterations, okay? And today we are going to talk about a different type of the loop, which is while loop. So before we move on, and let's do a very quick review. In last lecture, we talked about the structure of the for loop, right? And the structure of the for loop is for the we are visiting all the members in an object, okay, and then colon, and then we enter the body of the for loop, and you can have as many lines as you want to, and eventually we also have an else. And if we finish this iteration normally, and then we will also go into the else part, and then we will execute all the code in the else section. Okay, and another thing is, well, when you are doing the for loop and you are visiting all the members in this sequence, and sometimes you don't really have to use the control variable I. So for example, like this one, for I in the range of 3. So range 3, we have 3 values, 0, 1, and 2, right? And then we are using I to visit all the members in the range of the 3. And in the body, I just print bark each time. So since I'm visiting 3 items in that range, and then I'm gonna print bark for 3 times, right? So bark, bark, bark. And the problem is, for this piece of the code, I didn't really use the control variable I, and that's definitely okay. So this is the way that we can guarantee we repeat something for a given number of the times. And if you don't have to use the control variable I, that's okay. Okay, and another thing we talk about is we can use the for loop to visit a string character by character. So you can do for character in a string, and then this character or the char will be the control variable, and then you are going to use the char to visit one character at one time. So you are going to visit HELLO, and the next one will be space. So yes, when you are visiting a string character by character, and sometimes you visit letters or numbers or some non-letter, non-number special characters. Okay, and another thing is, well, the nested iteration. For the nested iteration, we are putting a iteration inside of the body of another iteration. So we have a nested iteration. And for the nested iteration, when you write the code, and well, sometimes I prefer to go to do the body of the body of the outer iteration first, and then I add the outer iteration. Or, well, sometimes I want to do the outer iteration first, and then I do the inner iteration. Well, there's no good or bad way, and it's really depends on, one, your habit, and two, what is the problem you are trying to solve. Okay, and then for this one, for I in the range of 5, and that is the outer iteration, right? And then for the range 5, and we have 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So there are 5 possible runs of the outer iteration. And then if you check the inner iteration, and then we have for j in range of 3. So range of 3 is 0, 1, and 2. So for each time we run the inner iteration, and then you know it will run for 3 times, right? So, well, when I is 0, and then we enter the inner iteration, and then, well, j will first be 0, and then j will be 1, and j will be 2. And after we finish using j to visit 2, we finish everything in the body of the outer iteration, and then we will go back, and then we are going to use I to visit 1. So I is 1, and then we go inside, and then j is 0, and j is 1, and j is 2, right? So, well, this is how if you want to run this code, and it will better explain how the nested iteration works. And today we move on, and we talk about the while loop, and then we talk about the combination of the conditions and the iterations. Well, the first question we want to answer is, why having a for loop is not enough? Why we really have to learn the while loop? Well, and the while loop is usually considered as the indefinite loops or conditional loops. This means as long as a condition is true, and then we keep on looping. And when the condition changes from true to false, and then we stop the iteration. Okay, well, it can be considered as an indefinite loop because we don't know how many iterations that a while loop can run. And let me write some of the code we have already seen. So I'm gonna create the number 10, and then I'm gonna delete everything here. And let me give you an example, like for I in range 15, for example, and then print counting colon comma I. Okay, so I'm just counting from 0 to 14, right? So I'm counting from 0 to 14 in this case, and if I run that, I'm gonna counting 0 to counting 14. So well, this is what we are expecting, and we can call a for loop a definite loop because even before we run this iteration, we know how many runs we are gonna run. We are gonna run for 15 runs, right? And let me give you another example. If I have a string, say my string, okay, oops, say let's do Python, and then I do a for char in my string, and then I just print the char. Okay, and then well, this is the code you know, and we are using the char as a control variable to visit all the characters one by one. So if I run this, and you know there are probably 10 to 15 iterations. Why? Because there are that number of the characters in that string. So well, I'm just visiting all the characters one by one. So for both of the iterations we have already learned from the last lecture, and well, they have a common feature. That is, we are visiting some sequence, one member after another member. So since that sequence has already been defined, it could be a range, it could be a string, but that sequence has already been defined, right? So we know how many iterations we are going to run even before we start the iteration. And that's the reason we call that definite loop. We know how many runs we are going to run. Okay, and then for the while loop, it is something different, and I'm gonna show you this example. So suppose that we have a car, and then we comes to a really weird traffic intersection, and the rule is, well, see this traffic signal, if it is green, we can go forward. Otherwise, we have to go through the loop once before we can check the traffic signal again. So if it is green, we go. Otherwise, we stay in the iteration or stay in the loop. Okay? So this is the one analogy of the indefinite loop. Because if you check the condition once, if it is green, and then what? You just go straight. Otherwise, you will stay in the loop, come one round, check it again. If it is not green, we go around and check it again. So you go around and around and around, and you don't know how many iterations you are going to do, right? So well, and then if we try to give a formal definition, and then there are a total of three parts. So there is a test condition, and in this case that is the traffic signal, and then we have the body of the loop, and that is we are going to drive around once before we can check it again. And then well, what we are going to do after the loop, and which is here, right? And well, another story I usually tell to my students was, well, the story that how I proposed to my wife, well, my girlfriend, many years ago. Okay, I'm not going to tell you how many years ago. At that time, I was definitely dumb, and one day I just feel, okay, let me ask her. And then I say, hey, honey, do you want to marry me? And my wife, my girlfriend at that time, she was kind of shocked. And she said, is that a marriage proposal? Well, and I didn't really expect her to be so serious. And I was a little bit shocked too, and I say, yes. Well, and then she got really mad on me, and she said, "No, what's wrong with you?" So, well, this was my first proposal, and then okay, and then she gave me a red light. So I behaved well, try to be a good boyfriend for a month or so, and then I asked her this question again. I say, "Hey, honey, would you like to marry me?" And she was, what's wrong with you again, Young? No. And then I just stay in this loop again, and then I ask her again. Well, and that's really crazy, right? And that's not a good example to do a marriage proposal, guys, and don't learn from me. And well, eventually after asking her this way for like roughly a dozen of times, and I believe she gets bored, and eventually she said yes. So, yep, this was my story, and that is an indefinite loop. Why? Because I check, my wife gives me the signal, and that is the condition. Well, if she says no, and then I stay in the loop, and then I buy her presents, and I talk to her, and then we stay together, and then well, at a certain time, I want to check the condition again. If she gives me a red light again, and then I go back to this loop, and then move on, and then I'm gonna check this condition. Okay, so this is indefinite loop. Why? Because when I started this loop, I have no idea how many rounds I'm gonna run. Okay, so if you compare this kind of iteration with versus the iteration we have already known, and then you see the difference. For those iterations I'm displaying, and you know how many iterations we are going to run. But for my marriage proposal case, I definitely had no idea how many times I'm going to propose. And again, guys, and do something different to what I have done. And be romantic and try to propose only once, and that's the only ones you have to propose in your life, and that's a bad thing. Okay, I'm gonna pause the video from here, and then we're gonna continue our discussion about the while iterations.